Mata Hari is a name that has for more than 100 years captured the public's imagination. The woman behind the persona acquired her fame as an exotic dancer and courtesan living in Paris during the French Belle Époque. Meaning Eye of Dawn in Javanese, Mata Hari would have had you believe that she was a Hindu princess born of a union between a Dutch adventurer and a Javanese temple dancer. As the story goes, she blossomed into a beautiful young lady and learned the sensuous and sacred temple dances from her mother. It was then her gift to bring these lithe routines to the Western world, where she entertained, enthralled, and seduced. Yet the character of Mata Hari was just that, an invention. According to biographer Pat Shipman, Mata Hari loved men, but she did not love the truth. Ultimately, the myth that she had created was turned against her as she faced a French firing squad. Convicted of being the most lethal and dangerous spy of World War I, it was said that she was responsible for the death of 50,000 French soldiers. Not surprisingly, the true story of Mata Hari, insofar as it can be ascertained, is far different from what both she and the French political elite of her day would have you believe. This is the legend and the truth about Mata Hari, the naked spy. Mata Hari's real name was Margaretha Zelle MacLeod. She was born in 1876 to Adam and Anna Zelle, a middle-class Dutch family living in Leeuwarden, the Netherlands. The eldest sibling and the only girl among her three brothers, Margaretha's dark hair and eyes and a tawny complexion made her stand out from most of those around her. Her father Adam was a successful haberdasher, but also made some well-timed investments in the oil industry. This brought enough wealth for the family to live in comfort and for Margaretha and her brothers to be sent to private schools. Margaretha's father doted on her, spending lavishly on gifts and dressing her in fine clothes. She took piano and horse riding lessons from an early age and was taught English, French, and German at school. The fortunes of the Zelle family soon, however, took a turn for the worst, with Margaretha's father declaring bankruptcy in 1899 and her parents divorcing soon after. Adam Zelle moved to Amsterdam, with Margaretha and her brothers being left behind to live in a small, cramped apartment with their mother Anna. Sadly, Margaretha's mother died 2 years later of tuberculosis. The four Zelle children were sent to live with various relatives, and the then 15-year-old Margaretha attended a boarding school in Leiden, having aspirations to one day become a kindergarten teacher. This dream was cut short when the school principal took an inappropriate interest in young Margaretha, with the result that she was sent home in disgrace in 1893. The headmaster, a man in his 50s, in a position of authority over minor children, suffered no consequences. Cast adrift, at 16 years of age, Margaretha was sent away to live with yet another set of relatives in The Hague. As a 17-year-old young lady with few prospects for her future, Margaretha was restless and longed for excitement. Hoping for love and adventure, Margaretha responded to a Lonely Hearts advertisement placed in the local newspaper. The advert read, "Officer on home leave from Dutch East Indies would like to meet a girl of pleasant character. Object, matrimony." The officer in question was Rudolph John MacLeod, a Scottish-born captain in the Dutch colonial army. 20 years her senior, Captain MacLeod had for nearly 2 decades been stationed in the Dutch East Indies, which is present-day Indonesia. He posted his advert in the newspaper in 1895 after returning to the Netherlands for a period of sick leave the year prior. MacLeod was intrigued when he received Margaretha's reply, which happened to include a photo. Rudolph MacLeod and Margaretha exchanged a few letters before agreeing to meet at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam on the 24th of March 1895. The pair fell instantly in love. Just 6 days after they met, they became engaged to be married. The wedding took place a few months later in July 1895 at the City Hall in Amsterdam, just prior to Margaretha's 19th birthday. After a brief honeymoon in Germany, the couple returned to live in the Netherlands. The marriage was immediately beset with problems, with Rudolf drinking heavily, abusing Margaretha, visiting prostitutes, and having affairs with multiple other women. Margaretha, on the other hand, was a flirt, was discontent with the meagre pension her husband was earning, and had no intention of being a housewife. Rudolf MacLeod was eventually well enough to return to active military service, and on the 1st of May 1897, he and Margaretha moved to Java in the Dutch East Indies. Given Rudolf's officer's status, the couple were set up in a grand colonial residence complete with servants. When Margaretha was 20 years old, she gave birth to a son who was named Norman John. The family soon welcomed a second addition, this time a daughter named Jean-Louise, affectionately nicknamed Non. The marriage, however, remained far from the idyllic union Margaretha hoped for. Rudolf's struggles with alcohol, infidelity, and financial irresponsibility contrasted starkly with Margaretha's vibrant and passionate demeanor. She quickly became known in her community for her elegance and charm, and her beauty did not go unnoticed among the military men stationed on the Indonesian archipelago. Her flirtatious nature served only to fuel the fire of her husband's ire. Despite the domestic strife, Margaretha thrived living within the social circles of the high-ranking military elite. She entertained guests regularly and became a fixture at dinner parties and events. She also became enamored with Indonesian culture, in particular, the style of dance she observed the local women performing. It was here that she began to create for herself a new persona, adopting for the first time the name Mata Hari. The excitement of living in an exotic location soon wore out when the MacLeod family relocated to a secluded village after Rudolf retired from the army. The isolation of rural life and Rudolf's increasing bitterness and antagonism towards his wife pushed their marriage to the brink of collapse. Compounding the couple's marital woes was the sudden sickness that befell their children in the summer of 1899. Norman, who was just 2.5 years old, succumbed to his illness. Nonnie, though barely a year old, managed to pull through and recover. The circumstances surrounding young Norman's death were unclear. Rumors swirled that he had been poisoned by his nanny. What is more likely is that he was suffering from congenital syphilis, a disease introduced to the MacLeod family thanks to Rudolf's many visits to prostitutes and his affairs with other women. In those days, the disease was treated using mercury, the toxicity of which more than likely contributed towards the young boy's death. The tragedy of their son's passing took Rudolf and Margaretha's marriage to breaking point. Not only did Rudolf abuse Margaretha, on one occasion even attacking her with a bread knife, but he also openly kept a Javanese woman as a concubine. This was enough to drive Margaretha from the family home, and she went to live with another Dutch family on the island who agreed to take her in. In March of 1902, the MacLeod family returned home to the Netherlands. This did little to mend the marriage, and by August of that year, Rudolf and Margaretha had officially divorced. The court granted Margaretha custody of Non, but with Rudolf's refusal to pay alimony, Margaretha wasn't able to support her daughter. As a divorcee with few opportunities available to her, Margaretha was compelled to surrender her 4-year-old daughter to her ex-husband. Then aged 26, Margaretha faced a bleak reality, devoid of financial resources and family support. In 1903, Margaretha set her sights on Paris, driven by the hope of earning enough money to get her daughter back. Her first attempts at working as a painter's model and teaching German and English conversation were unsuccessful, and she was soon compelled to return penniless to the Netherlands to live with Rudolf's aunt and uncle. When Rudolf learned of this, he forced his uncle to turn her out of the home. Faced with few options and nowhere else really to go, Margaretha returned to Paris in 1904. A city known for being a haven for runaways and romantics, she joined the circus performing as a horse rider under the name Lady MacLeod. The owner of the circus, noticing Margaretha's exquisite body and charm, suggested to her that she should take up dancing. It was then that Margaretha took a definitive first step to reinvent herself. Drawing inspiration from the time she spent in Indonesia, she crafted a series of exotic dances inspired by the cultural traditions of the Javanese women she had observed. She imbued her movements with an eroticism and religiosity that shattered the boundaries of acceptability set by Victorian conservatism. Using the name that she had adopted in Indonesia, Matahari began to create her mythology, centered around the claim that she was a Javanese princess who held the secrets of Oriental sacred dance. Some have said that she was a pioneer of early modern dance, but her exotic dancing style was more akin to a theatrical striptease or burlesque. Her routines involved the shedding of her veils until she was wearing nothing except her jewelry and a gold-plated breastplate. Although she customarily wore skin-toned tights which only gave the appearance of her being naked, she did at least on one occasion appear totally nude on stage. Her first few dances were performed at private parties in Paris, but her sensual form of dance and exotic backstory soon started to attract the attention of the public at large. Matahari had her big break when, on the 13th of March 1905, she performed at the Guimet Museum for an audience of the Parisian social elite. Margaretha happened to be the mistress of the museum's founder, French millionaire industrialist Émile Guimet. She became an overnight sensation, her admirers and the press alike showering Matahari with praise and adoration. This success paved the way for her to tour across Europe's most prestigious theatres, including the Scala in Milan, the Olympia in Paris, and the Opera of Monte Carlo. At the height of her career as an exotic dancer, Matahari was being paid as much as 10,000 francs per show, which is approximately $42,000 today. By 1907, Matahari had amassed for herself a considerable fortune. Her problem was that she spent her money just as fast as she earned it. Her immense popularity opened other opportunities for her beyond the stage. She appeared on the cover of Vogue magazine and became an influencer of consumer products and fashion trends, being paid by well-known designers to wear their clothing at events and parties. Matahari was, however, not the only woman to be casting off her veils on stage. From the theatres of London to New York, she had many competitors and imitators. Most notable among these was Maud Allan. All these performers were in one way or another playing the role of Salome, the passionate, sexually desiring Jewish princess who performed a striptease for her stepfather, King Herod, in exchange for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. While she competed for attention on stage, Matahari's personal life was no less colourful. As her biographer Pat Shipman put it, she left a trail of smitten admirers behind her wherever she went in Europe. With her penchant for flirtation and seduction, the many relationships she had with wealthy military and businessmen supported her extravagant lifestyle. She carefully selected her many courtiers based on their wealth, status, and willingness to spend enormous sums on her upkeep. Among her many benefactors was Lieutenant Alfred Kiepert of the 11th Hussars Regiment in the German Imperial Army. Matahari became his mistress after she performed in Berlin. Naturally, Kiepert's wife was none too pleased, forcing her husband to part ways with his courtesan. Kiepert broke off the relationship, but not before famously giving his sweetheart a parting gift in 1909 of 300,000 gold marks, a sum equivalent to approximately $1 million in today's terms. Another man to whom Matahari became a paramour was the French banker and stockbroker Xavier Rousseau. He provided for her every want and need, putting her up in a hotel, then a chateau in the French countryside, and finally in a Normandy-style mansion. She lived as Madame Rousseau until the end of 1911. Rousseau turned out, however, to be a spendthrift, squandering not only his own fortune, but that of his mistress as well. Mata Hari and Rousseau ended their relationship when the money on which it was built ran out. By 1912, Mata Hari was entering her late 30s. Her ex-husband Rudolph MacLeod had divorced from his second wife, which prompted Margaretha to petition the courts for custody of her daughter Non. Her request was denied. Mata Hari's allure was also starting to fade by that time. Her star was most definitely on the wane. She had set the stage ablaze for nearly 10 years, a career much longer than many of her contemporaries. In truth, she was not a particularly good dancer, relying more on her sex appeal and mythological backstory than her dancing skills. She sought work in the more traditional theatre, but her self-confidence took a knock when she was turned down for a role after being described by its producer as looking too matronly. Mata Hari was starting to get a little older and a bit more curvy. She couldn't compete with her many younger imitators then gracing Europe's stages. She nevertheless managed to sign a 6-month run of her new performance called The Profane Vision, which she was to perform at Berlin's Metropole Theatre. Before even her first performance, Europe descended into chaos. The First World War marked the end of the optimism and prosperity of the Belle Époque. The formerly vibrant world of performance, art and the theatre was virtually snuffed out. When Germany declared war on France on the 3rd of August 1914, the continent braced itself for a period of bitter fighting. The hostilities brought Mata Hari's already declining career as a performer to a complete standstill, forcing her to rely increasingly on the financial support of her many male patrons. Mata Hari was in Berlin when war broke out. Although she was Dutch, a country officially neutral in the war, she was marked as a citizen of an enemy nation because of how long she had spent living in France. In a move that left her both indignant and financially strapped, the German authorities froze her assets and confiscated her belongings. Margaretha's show was cancelled, and after a dispute with the costume maker, her prized collection of fur coats was garnished to defray expenses. She was thus compelled to leave Germany in 1915 to return for the first time in many years to The Hague. There she rented a fashionable home courtesy of one of her patrons, Baron Eduard Willem van der Capellen. But she quickly grew bored with her new quiet life. Her Dutch citizenship allowed her the ability to travel relatively freely between warring nations France and Germany, although she was compelled to pass through Spain and Britain to avoid the front lines of battle. As she planned what to do next, she was unaware that her movements across Europe had attracted the watchful eyes of espionage agencies the world over. The British, French, and Germans all shadowed her, intrigued by her social connections, frequent cross-border travels, and many lovers, all of whom were senior military officers. During one such excursion, she was stopped by the authorities in Britain and questioned about her travels and intentions. She answered that she was on her way to Paris to sell some personal effects and to book some new shows. MO5, which would be renamed MI5 just a few months later, marked in a report that Margaretha Zelle was most unsatisfactory and should be refused permission to return to the UK. In the autumn of 1915, when she was back in The Hague, Mata Hari received a visit from Karl Krumer, the German consul in Amsterdam. He represented the interests of German intelligence, and the purpose of his visit was to persuade Mata Hari to become a spy for the Germans. The elite social circles within which she moved, her feminine wiles, and her ability to speak multiple languages made her the perfect candidate to gather intelligence from enemy officers. Margaretha was reluctant at first, but couldn't resist when the promise of payment of 20,000 francs was dangled in front of her. She accepted the offer, considering the payment compensation for the fur coats and jewels that had been confiscated from her by the Germans. She later claimed that she never intended to fulfill her end of the bargain, but rather saw the acceptance of the money as a form of retribution. Margaretha was codenamed Agent H21. The H stood for the name of her handler, Captain Hoffmann, and she was the 21st agent to be recruited by the Germans. Now enlisted as a German spy, Margaretha was sent to Cologne to receive training in spycraft from the renowned Dr. Elisabeth Schragmüller, including in the use of invisible ink and writing in secret code. Again, Mata Hari would claim that she never actually intended to spy for Germany, saying that she poured the contents of bottles of invisible ink given to her over the side of a ship. When she returned to Paris in May 1916, Mata Hari attempted to fall back into her former life of glamour and luxury. However, her celebrity status and the sheer number of her high-profile lovers, which when war broke out included French Minister for War General Adolphe Pierre Messimy, now served a dual purpose. Margaretha was a key person of interest to the French intelligence service. While living at the Grand Hotel in Paris, she routinely spotted two men following her. The men were French intelligence agents eager to uncover any evidence of pro-German activities or espionage. They observed, with great suspicion, their cosmopolitan target receiving a large number of male visitors, many of whom were military officers. It was during this time in Paris that Margaretha met and fell in love with Vladimir de Maslov. The 23-year-old Russian army officer was fighting for the French as a member of the Russian Expeditionary Force. Margaretha referred to Maslov affectionately as Vadim, describing him as the one great love of her life. The couple's love affair was cut short when he returned to the front. Vadim was badly injured in a phosphine gas attack while fighting at the Battle of Verdun, losing the sight in his left eye and severely damaging his lungs and vocal cords. He spent many months recovering in a military hospital near the front lines of battle. Mata Hari was determined to spend time with her new love, and so planned to travel to the French town of Vital, which was near to where Vadim was stationed. The pretext for her journey was to seek treatment for her ailing health. The challenge, however, was navigating the bureaucratic and military hurdles required to travel to the spa town, which was situated dangerously close to the lines of battle within a strictly controlled military zone. To her consternation, Margaretha was denied the permits necessary to make the trip. She called on the help of a former lover who worked for the local police. He suggested that she seek out a man by the name of Georges Ledoux at the Military Bureau for Foreigners on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. Unbeknownst to Mata Hari, she was being set on a path that would lead to her ruin. She was now moving in a world far removed from the bright lights of the stage where she had once shone so brightly. As she entered the immigration office at 282 Boulevard Saint-Germain, she had no idea she was entering the very heart of the French Intelligence Service headquarters. It was there during August of 1916 that Margaretha found herself face to face with the formidable head of French counterintelligence, Captain Georges Ledoux. He had been closely monitoring her activities following the reports from British intelligence that raised suspicions of Mata Hari being a German spy. The report even said that if Mata Hari entered Britain again, she would be arrested and handed over to Scotland Yard. For Ledoux, the unexpected arrival of Mata Hari was nothing short of providential. His prime suspect had unwittingly walked straight into his hands. Seizing the moment, Ledoux gained her trust and authorized her travel documents, seeing in her request an unparalleled opportunity either to recruit her as a spy or more likely to entrap her. Returning from Vitel after spending time with her beloved Vadim, Margaretha resumed her conversations with Ledoux. Driven by money and a desire to secure a future with the Russian captain whom she wished to marry, Mata Hari agreed to spy for France. What she didn't do, however, was disclose to Ledoux her dealings with Germany. Had she done so, perhaps her story might have ended differently. The assignment given to Mata Hari by Ledoux was for her to go to Belgium to seduce the Crown Prince of Germany, Wilhelm. Even for a woman of Mata Hari's repute, this was an audacious, if not impossible task. In exchange, Mata Hari was promised to be paid a staggering sum of 1 million francs as her fee. which is more than $2.5 million in today's money. Ledoux promised her that the details of her mission and the subsequent payment would be arranged once she arrived back in the Netherlands. With that, Margaretha left Paris on the 5th of November 1916. Travelling with a conspicuous 10 trunks of luggage, she proceeded to the Spanish port city of Vigo. From there, she boarded the SS Hollandia, which on the 14th of November docked at the Cornish town of Falmouth. Given the wartime conditions, the British authorities conducted a search of the ship's cargo and inspected the passenger list. When a Madame MacLeod was spotted among the travellers, agents from Scotland Yard promptly arrested her. Despite the protestations of the ship's captain, she was subjected to a strip search by a policewoman, then removed from the ship and taken to London for interrogation. The arrest by the British authorities was in fact a result of mistaken identity. They thought Mata Hari was Clara Benedicts, a known German agent from Hamburg. While Margaretha was subjected to days of questioning by Sir Basil Thompson of the Metropolitan Police, telegrams were exchanged between the British and the Dutch legation as to Mata Hari's identity. In what was most certainly a bluff, the British said they had received a telegram confirming her identity as the exotic dancer Mata Hari, and that she was also a confirmed German spy. Mata Hari then broke, finally admitting to espionage, but on behalf of the French, not Germany. She said she was working for George Ledoux. The British made inquiries with Ledoux, who replied saying that he had always suspected Mata Hari of being a German spy, and had only recruited her with the goal of exposing her. With no evidence of having committed any crime, the British reluctantly released Margaretha, but she was not permitted to continue her journey onwards to The Hague. She was instead forced to return to Spain. Once back in Spain, Mata Hari found herself having to improvise in a desperate bid to salvage her increasingly precarious position. She immediately wrote to Ledoux to request new instructions, but received no reply. With her original mission of seducing the Crown Prince proving unattainable, she set her sights on other targets. She looked through the diplomatic register at the Ritz Hotel in Madrid and quickly found the name of a high-ranking German officer. Major Arnold Calais was the German attaché and a formidable figure within the German intelligence network. After making an appointment, she presented herself to Calais as a German ally. As with so many other men, she seduced him. Margaretha started feeding Calais what she deemed harmless gossip, in return for which he told her of Germany's plans to land soldiers via submarine on the coast of Morocco to stir up a local revolution against the French. She triumphantly penned a letter to Ledoux, which she sent through the hotel post. She wrote uncoded and in plain ink, her training in spycraft evidently having been forgotten. As a neutral country in the war, Spain was crawling with spies and counter-spies. It was more than likely that hotel staff members were on the payroll of at least one, if not both sides in the war. Mail, especially letters sent by those of high social standing or persons under suspicion, was likely to be intercepted and read before reaching its final destination. Mata Hari was playing a dangerous game and had unwittingly set in motion the final act in her tragic saga. Her letter to Ledoux had been intercepted, and Major Calais was furious when he learned of Margaretha's betrayal. He decided it was time to set an elaborate trap. The German officer dispatched a series of telegrams to Berlin detailing his interactions with Agent H21 and seeking guidance on her compensation. As he knew they would, the communications were intercepted and decrypted by French intelligence, who swiftly deduced that Agent H21 could only be Mata Hari herself. Calais had written his telegrams in a code that was known to have already been broken by French cryptographers the year prior. Mata Hari's web of deceit was quickly unraveling. Concerned about not having received a single telegram from Ledoux since she had arrived in Spain, Mata Hari found herself increasingly isolated. She decided it was time to return to France. She arrived back in Paris on the 3rd of January 1917. For the next few weeks, Mata-Hari went about her business in Paris, getting her hair dyed, seeing the dressmaker and her many lovers. But she was sick with worry. Ladue had still not replied to her letters, and she had not managed to re-establish contact with him. Even worse still, she hadn't received any word at all from her beloved Vadim. Eventually she was reunited with him when he returned to Paris on leave, but was devastated to learn that his superiors had forbidden him from marrying Margaretha. He promptly ended the relationship and returned to the Western Front. Heartbroken and feeling a sense of the world closing in around her, Margaretha knew that time was not on her side. On the morning of the 13th of February 1917, Margaretha heard a knock at her door. Outside room 131 of the Elysee Palace Hotel stood the men sent to arrest her on charges of espionage. Mata-Hari was read her warrant of arrest, was allowed to get dressed, and was led away. Margaretha found herself confined within the cold walls of the notorious Saint-Lazare women's prison. Her transformation from celebrated star to a common prisoner was a total humiliation. For 6 months, she was interrogated by Captain Pierre Bouchardon, all the while being kept in deplorable conditions in a cold, dank cell. She wrote a great many letters to her network of powerful French military and businessmen, but to no avail. There would be no knight in shining armor coming to save her. Mata-Hari persistently denied the charges leveled against her, but her resilience was worn down as the months dragged on. When Bouchardon told her about the telegram sent by Calais, she finally cracked and admitted to having accepted money from the Germans. However, she denied ever having acted against France. Mata-Hari thought her confession would serve to exonerate her, but it had the opposite effect. Captain Bouchardon remained unpersuaded of her innocence. In the shadow of the ongoing war, and with French morale at an all-time low and the need for a public victory acute, the truth of the matter became secondary to the desired narrative. Mata-Hari had become a pawn in a chess game of statecraft, and she moved across the board as it suited French political objectives. Her role as a spy and the importance she played in the war was greatly exaggerated, serving as a convenient distraction from the country's military and morale crises. There were fears that France was on the brink of collapse under the weight of the exhaustion of war. Perhaps Mata-Hari would become the perfect scapegoat. Her reputation as an international woman, an exotic dancer, and a courtesan meant that even before her trial commenced, the scales of justice were irrevocably tipped against her. On the 4th of July 1917, formal charges of espionage were levied against Margaretha. Her trial, which was little more than a fait accompli, commenced on the 24th of July 1917 and was held in camera at the Palais de Justice. Captain Bouchardon, representing the French state, portrayed her as a traitor who had maintained clandestine communications with the enemy, collecting and transmitting vital information to German forces. The prosecution heavily emphasized her frequent travels and her interactions with various high-ranking German officials. The trial lasted only 2 days. Despite the absence of any direct evidence against her, the panel of 7 judges convicted Margaretha on all charges. The sentence imposed was death, a verdict that the prosecution said marked her as arguably the greatest female spy of our century, and the cause of the death of as many as 50,000 French soldiers. On the morning of the 15th of October 1917, the inhabitants of the city of Paris were oblivious to the somber proceedings due to take place that day at the Vincennes firing range. It was here that Margaretha Zelle was escorted from her prison cell to meet her fate at the hands of a French firing squad. Mata-Hari chose to face the soldiers with unbound hands and without a blindfold. As her lawyer and a nun from the prison looked on, she blew a final, defiant kiss. As dawn broke, the signal was given, and Margaretha was struck by a volley of bullets. A non-commissioned officer then walked up to her already dead body and fired a final bullet into her temple to confirm the execution. The reaction across Europe was a mixture of vindication and sensationalism, with newspapers lauding the execution as a triumph in the unrelenting battle against espionage. In a final act of dispassion, the French state auctioned off Margaretha's belongings to recoup the costs of her trial. As nobody came forward to claim her body, it was given to the Paris University Medical School to be used for dissection. Her head was embalmed and, strangely, went missing sometime during the 1950s. It has never been found. Rumors began to circulate that Mata Hari had in fact escaped and was still alive. One story said that she had thrown open her fur coat, her naked body so dazzling the men before her that she was able to run off into the forest. The unfortunate reality for Margaretha Zelle was that the tragedy of her life ended that day at the firing range. Margaretha's then teenage daughter Non, although having disowned her mother, was devastated to learn of her fate through an article in the newspaper. A few years later, Non suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 21. The lingering spectre of syphilis, a cruel inheritance from her father, was speculated to be the cause. When Margaretha's former husband Rudolf MacLeod was informed of her death by reporters, he remarked, "Whatever she's done in life, she did not deserve that." He died just over a decade later in 1928. Within a mere 2 years following her death, the narrative of Mata Hari's life began to captivate the imagination of writers and filmmakers. The portrayal of Mata Hari as a synthesis of a cold-blooded spy, a malevolent seductress, and a captivating femme fatale proved irresistible material for Hollywood, inspiring a slew of films from the iconic portrayal by Greta Garbo in Mata Hari to Jean Moreau's interpretation in Mata Hari, Agent H21. As the prototypical femme fatale character, Mata Hari is the subject of more books, TV shows, comics, movies, and even YouTube videos than any other spy. It was only in 2017, 100 years after her death, that France declassified and released the transcript of the judgment in the Mata Hari trial, along with an archive of other documents. Much has been written on why Mata Hari turned to spying, with the obvious answer being money. It's quite possible that other factors played a role also. Mata Hari was, after all, a performer, both on and off the stage. She constantly reinvented herself and became all things to all men. Perhaps for Mata Hari, spying was just another performance. In the words of Ernest Volkmann, no single individual has ever done so much to glamorize the world of espionage. As she passed from life unto death, her myth and legend became immortal.